Right, let's do it. Felipe, what's up, man? How you doing?
So Brian, awesome to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. Let me give a quick intro to this chat here. I think it is important to give some context here. The way Felipe and I met is there's a WhatsApp group with the top call it 50 founders in Brazil. And I asked the group, I said, hey, who's the best kind of commercial go-to-market salesperson that you know? And then I got this little direct message from Alessio, who's at Pipefy. If you don't know Pipefy is one of the leading software as a service companies to come out of Brazil. It's a global company. Felipe was one of the first people to join, I think the second or third person to join, kind of part of the founding team. And he, they didn't even have customers when he joined. So he has legit experience doing this. And so when we were building Camu, there was this gaping hole. And after having two conversations with Felipe, I remember Yuri and I okay, we have to do whatever it takes to bring this guy on as a co-founder. And so hence, I guess the rest is history and the rest is the future. So without further ado, I want to give Felipe the mic and take us through, and share with a little more about the experience. I think mostly B2B on this call. So I think a lot of your experience is super relevant for everybody here.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks for the intro. Amazing to be here with such an awesome crew. Guys, let's go straight into it. I have a few slides to share, but most importantly, I just wanna share some stories and insights. And I want to be very objective and very actionable in the stuff that I want to bring. So I have maybe 30 minutes of content, 40 minutes at the max, but feel free to jump in. If I think questions come as we go, I think we make it more interactive and probably more productive as well. All right. Super quick, let me share very quick background on myself. So started my career in studied business administration, started as a trainee at American Chamber of Commerce, very sales driven work at that time, very young, found out that I like to sell and to talk to people and negotiate. After that, had a pretty unique opportunity to build the development and fundraising department at the largest children's hospital in Brazil. So very nothing related to tech at that time, but was pretty unique as we started from scratch also and built one of the largest fundraising teams in Brazil and scaled that to more than 50 people, and turned out to be a pretty cool journey. Spent some time abroad, went to study and did an MBA at INSEAD, spent some time in France, some time in Singapore. At the end of that program, Alessio called me. Alessio was a friend from college. He was the founder of Pipefy. He was starting the company at that time. Told me, hey, Felipe, I'm starting this thing, SaaS workflow, no code platform. You want to jump on board? We don't have customers. I need someone to run the sales side, right? And that's exactly when I joined. So very early, founding team, 4 people, pre-revenue, first guy on the sales side, trying to figure out everything. We did an acceleration at 500 startups, which was pretty cool in the very early days. And then I had this amazing opportunity to lead the revenue engine from zero to a little bit over $40 million in AR over a period of 10 years. So basically built sales, customer success, professional services, channels, and scaled that to a team of a little bit over 200 people. Amazing journey, very tough and challenging throughout that journey. At some point, this is a real picture of me in the office. I promised myself never going to start anything from scratch again. Decided to wrap up the Pipefy journey, and then my sabbatical lasted a month until I met Brian and Yuri, and then I said man, maybe one of those opportunities won't come by so easily. And I saw an amazing opportunity to just build with an incredible team and try to solve big problems with a bunch of smart people, right? And that's when I joined. So 5 months in, very early days at Camu as well. I was kind of updating some of those slides from the last chat. We had 1 customer at that time. Now we made the jump to 5, and we have a few more coming in, and helping the team basically figure out go to market, close the first 10 customers, 20 customers, and then scale from there. So this is a very quick overview into my journey, and how I want to approach the conversation is mostly I don't want to bring a bunch of theory or frameworks. It's literally if I were to do this again, how I would approach it, right? How I'm approaching at Camu right now, what I've learned, what the mistakes I've done, and how I'm trying to be a little bit smarter on the second run, right? And the cool thing is that even though the Pipefy journey was super successful, right? As you guys saw, like 0 to over 40 million in ARR, like over 500 people in the company, we turned profitable in the end of the journey and so on. Super successful story. At the same time, like it was like we never really nailed from a go-to-market perspective, right? It was like brute force all the way. Some companies have the like the benefit or like they nailed from the start, right? Like amazing product market fit and go-to-market fit and things just like boom. And at Pipefy, we never really did it, right? It was like brute force all the way, like very inefficient, requiring a lot of people and so on. And the key reason for that is that we never really nailed a best strategy for go to market because Pipefy had some specific challenges, which is Pipefy was very horizontal product, right? Workflow, so everyone could use it. That meant that it was a massive market, amazing, but at the same time, it was a nightmare from a go to market perspective. And we took a lot of time to really nail our understanding around like, where can we win? Why we are so much better? Where and against who and for who, right? And we took a lot of time to figure that out, and that made the journey a lot more challenging and a lot more inefficient. So a lot of the insights come from that, and this is what I'll try to break down a little bit as we move on. Like when I think about like generating high impact in very early stage, I really like this concept of like generating high impact or high growth or like accelerating and all of that stuff. It really relates to your ability to do a couple things, which is applying your highest energy and resources in the smallest possible area, right? And this is important, of course, because in the beginning you don't have a lot of resources to deploy, right? So if you're spread too thin, there is not a lot of impact that you're generating. But more than that, you want to make sure that you're applying that energy also in the highest point of leverage, right? Which is where you can truly win. Because even if you're really focused and apply energy in one place only and try to compound there, if you're focusing on the wrong areas, that doesn't work either, right? And we're talking basically about two core concepts, which is like focus and then leverage, where you can win and why you can win, right? And we're going to talk about a little bit about this as we move on. Like, so in the very early days of the Camu journey, I'm basically obsessing about three things only, right? And this is my top priority at this moment, which is like focus. So really nailing and identifying a very small audience that we can delight, who they are, where they are, like how do we get to them and so on. The second one is leverage, which is like making sure that for that very small audience that we want to delight, we have a super strong and compelling, like unique value prop, right? Even if it is for a small pocket of customers, even if it's very niched, we need to be able to articulate value like at a different level, right? And then third is, okay, how do we build the foundations of like, how do we build a minimum demand gen system? How do we get to talk to more people like that and so on? And I'm going to cover basically those three things, right? So when we talk about focus, like learning to say no and to double down on a very small audience is a superpower at early stage. And it's also very, very hard to do, right? Because in the beginning, man, there's so many distractions, there's so many opportunities. You don't know exactly where to go after. So being able to focus is super important, right? So I like this concept of like, what is the smallest area, niche, product, use case you can monetize and delight your first customers, right? Because in the beginning, if you're trying to do a bunch of stuff and trying to build a massive product and people need that massive product, it's going to take a lot of time for you to build that, right? So trying to find that optimal spot between like, hey, maybe we can get only this audience, this type of customers, only this industry, only this very specific use case, right? And at Camu, we're trying to do exactly that. Like, it's not like but where we're going into like fiscal tax and all of that stuff, definitely not a blue ocean. There's a lot of people operating there. So it's how do you get into like a market that is a red ocean? There's a lot of people operating, right? You're trying to find one open door. Like, what is the smallest area or use case that we can actually kill and be better and articulate that we can be better? So this is what we're looking for, right? And in the beginning, like when you have nothing, that first revenue, that first customer can seem like a lot, right? Like, hey, I don't have anything. Like I have this opportunity to close this customer, right? But that can be super misleading as well. Like there is a super quick story from the early days at Pipefy. We're trying to figure out the first pricing model, and we went talk to our first investor, which is VC funding in the Bay Area, and put together like the pricing plan together. This guy input on that and like expectation that he would look at that and say like, hey, this is right, or this is wrong, or this is what you need to do, right? And then we presented that to the guy, and basically what he says, like, hey, the only thing I know is that this is wrong, right? Throw it out there and learn fast. And then basically at that time we had a bunch of like free users, and we haven't started to monetize yet. And he said, like, break down your customers into 4 buckets, 4 batches, and just throw a different price for those guys, right? And see what converts the best, how you optimize, and all of that stuff. And then, very naive, I thought like, hey, but this is not nice. We're gonna offer different price for different folks. They're gonna realize they got different price offered, and then not a very customer centric way to approach it, right? I was kind of thinking about this, and this guy said, hey man, if someone gets frustrated, you just give them Pipefy for free for the rest of their lives, right? And I was like, come on, and we're trying to get the first customers. And he was like, man, you're thinking the wrong way. Just optimize for learning. The revenue from those first customers doesn't really matter, right? Like what you should be optimizing for is to learn as fast as you can, like how much they want to pay, who they are, like are they willing to buy, are they not willing to buy? And sometimes in the beginning, it's easy for us to get caught up in that first customer, that opportunity. Oh, but you're gonna pay, we have no revenue, right? But in the end, like I think changing the mindset to optimize for the learning process, it's super important, right? So like optimize for learning, optimize for an audience that you can delight. I think another like cool discussion about that is like if you get the wrong first customers, like they can drastically slow you down, right? If they make you deploy your scarce resources in a place that is not your highest point of leverage. Like quick story also from the Camu days now, like when we started the company, like even like a little bit prior to me joining and getting on board, like I think the first 8 months or so, we had nailed like the first customer, right? Which was one company, right? And then at some point we had opportunity with a company, right? And then we sit down like, come on, man, this can maybe change your life, right? Like it's amazing opportunity, massive company and so on. And then they came out with this massive RFP, right? And all of the specs and stuff that they needed from a product perspective, right? And then when we sat down and things started to discuss, like, can we really do this? Now we probably can, right? But like applying our energy and resources here, is this the best place we can go, right? Or would we be better off just applying those development resources in like trying to nail 5 to 10 features that this other small audience that we want to focus on, smaller mid-sized companies, maybe we can delight them way more in the same period of time, instead of kind of marrying with this large company that probably going to have lots of requirements. The product's not going to be perfect for them. Like we're not going to delight them, and we're going to miss the opportunity of maybe moving much faster with a small audience that we can actually win, right? So I think this is interesting way to look at this. I think in the beginning, like we constantly overestimate the amount of stuff that we can execute at a high level, right? Like we're not good at assessing the exponential impact of trying to do several stuff at the same time. And like a very simple example of this, let's just add one industry to focus. It's one more industry, the product is similar and so on. But what we don't realize in the beginning is like one more industry, it's like different feature asks times different selling value props times different use cases, different content you need to do, like different events you need to go, different industry knowledge you need to develop, like different competitors you need to understand. So the complexity is not like it's not linear, right? It's literally exponential, and in the beginning you don't really realize that. So like applying focus, like trying to understand a very small niche and very small audience, it's super important and super critical, and this is one of the things that we're doing. Like for some of you that might have read this book, it's kind of a classic, like crossing the chasm, right? It talks a little bit about that, which is like there is this chasm that they call it's the space between the early adopters and the pragmatism, or the early majority. And they say like sometimes in the early days, like it's hard for you to make the jump from the first visionaries, but then the early majority, like sometimes they don't have enough validation. A lot of companies die there. So the way they talk about this is really like really find an audience that you can own and you can nail. Even if it's a small one, completely dominate, be able to articulate why you're 10x better on that group. And this will give you traction to, okay, I own this place, I have credibility on this, then to jump into the following ones, right? I think the other quick reflection I think I always like to bring is like, will that customer or that feature really change your life, right? Because there is always that discussion, oh, but we should close that customer, or they're asking about this. Man, like the framework I like to think about this is that will that revenue drastically change the business direction for the future? not for the scenario you're in, right? Because if you have nothing and you have something, it might seem like a lot, right? But the reality, man, it usually won't, right? It's usually not that additional revenue if it's the wrong fit of customer that will completely change the direction of the company, right? Will that logo drastically increase your chances of closing more deals? Like, will it really? Like, I think we often overestimate as well the impact of having that one logo, right? Man, everyone has a bunch of cool logos on their website and no one cares. That's the reality, right? Like, what is really important is that you have true use cases and customers that have a lot of impact, right? Like, we're working with that customer, make your product better to your target audience. I think in the end, this is what truly matters, right? So I think a lot of situations in the beginning, it's easy to get distracted with the temptations of like, oh, what about this customer? What about this feature? But like keeping focus on where we can win, where we can be 10x better, where we can develop something that is extremely exponentially better than the other alternatives, and where we can articulate that we can win, it's super important. So like what you're really looking in the beginning, like it's really like for pain, real pain, and underserved audience and need. And this is what you're going after, right? Like in terms of like learning how to identify real enthusiasm, some of the signs that we saw at Camu in the beginning is like we're showing literally just prototypes of the product. We didn't even have the product ready, and people are saying like, "That's what I want. This is better than what I have. I want to buy." Right? How do we buy? How do I move forward? Right? This is in the end what you're truly looking for. Right? Do they want to schedule the following call? Do they want to negotiate? Do they want to move forward and so on? Because in the beginning, like man, and I think like why this is important. I like to talk about this last one. Like most people are polite, especially in Latin America, and I think there's a lot of people from Latin America here. Like people, they're not direct enough sometimes. So people are nice. Like they're not gonna say that your product sucks, and they're gonna say, "Ah, this is interesting, this is cool." And you go out of that call saying like, "Ah, yeah, this is kind of cool. They're interested, they like it, and so on." But man, we also often think that our baby is prettier than it really is, right? So in the end, like true validation comes from like people, are they really excited? Do they really want to move forward? Do they want to buy? And do they want to like implement and get going? I think this is what you're looking for, right? True validation on that. And this is a very simple example from Camu. So like at Camu, we try to really decrease the hunting ground like a lot. And then accelerate product development to really delight a very small pocket of customers, which is literally companies that have one range of revenue that are on one ERP and one version of that ERP. It's SAP Business One customers. It's very specific, right? But why? Because we created a hypothesis there, and when we went to look there, we found like, hey, this is a very specific and underserved audience, and there is an open door here. Those guys don't have a lot of alternative, and we can articulate why we are a lot better, right? If we try to deploy a product to all ERPs at this point, try to understand what are the solutions for all the ERPs, try to develop a product to all of those guys, chances that we will not like delight anyone are very high, right? So we actually drastically decrease. And in the beginning, it sounds a little counterintuitive, right? Because you're talking to a lot of people in different ERPs, everyone has the pain, like, oh, but there's so much opportunity, maybe we could sell to everyone, should we just... But the reality is that when you double down and you start to accelerate the product development on that, and you really start to understand the very specific pains from that group, like the level of credibility that you also generate by like just them understanding, hey, these guys are actually building this for me. They truly understand what my pains and what I need. And this gives you so much speed and so much traction. And this is what we're seeing. So I think this is like concept one, like super specific focus and trying to nail like a very small audience. I think the exercise, I like to say like, what is the smallest area you can start delighting people? If this is an industry, a use case, a part of the product, a feature that you can monetize and you can start to delight folks, start to generate traction from there. Concept one, that's it. Concept two is around leverage. Why would someone be crazy not to use your product and service, right? Like this is kind of a good provocation. Like a couple of years ago, we worked at Pipefy with a mentor, which used to be the CRO at our table, and he made that provocation like, hey, why people be crazy not to use Pipefy that time? Then you kind of get caught off guard, like it's not the question you're used to thinking like why they would be crazy. You're used to talk about like why your product is good, how does it help, but it's a different level of like understanding value, right? Like and then very quick one, like how well can you articulate this, you think? Like 0 to 10. throw it in the chat, just out of curiosity. Like if you had to articulate why would someone be crazy not to use your product or service, how well you think you can articulate that like right out of the bat? This is actually a lot harder than it seems. Like really nailing and really understanding this to this level of like being able to articulate. And the reality is that like if you're starting, if you're going to outbound, if you're going to try to close the first customers, like outreach to people, like and so on, like this is actually the level of value you need to be able to present and to articulate, right? And even if this is comparable into a small audience, because you might think like, shit, I'm starting, like how can I articulate where people would be crazy not to go with us, right? And then like very simple examples. When we thought about Pipefy was a horizontal workflow solution. Like, man, why people would be crazy? Like we compete against a lot of stuff, a lot of players. There's a lot of larger companies in the market, right? But at some point we realized that for large companies that use, for example, ServiceNow and so on, for the core workflows, we're not the best alternative. But when we're talking about the long tail of workflows, small, like fragmented workflows across the business areas, Pipefy was drastically by far the best alternative because we're like the cost of deploying was so much lower and much lower dependence on IT, a lot more autonomy to the business teams. And there's a very strong value prop for IT teams and for business teams. But it took us a while to understand the very specific area where we could articulate that we're better. It's not like, hey, we're better than ServiceNow. It's like for this type of problem in these types of companies, like we can articulate that we are so much better, right? And then when we got to this understanding, man, like the ability for you to generate traction and to articulate and to explain why you're better and where you're not better, like and generate credibility with that, it's super powerful, right? And the same example with Camu, right? In the beginning, like we're building this thing, the product's not even ready, like completely, right? But as we started to look for this, and it makes a massive difference if you're uh, like consciously looking for it, right? Because if you're not even looking for that, chances you find it, it might be right in front of you. And then we found this very specific pocket, like SAP Business one version of SAP. There's so many ERPs, but it ends up there's like 6,000 companies in Brazil on that version of the ERP. They're totally underserved. The alternatives that they use are super old school. And we found a very small door that we can articulate that. And this is where we're focused, and this is where we decided to go in. Like, what is the impact of that? Like, real story. I'll bring some of the data of what of how we evolved, and I'll show you 3 different funnels. And they're gonna basically show first call, opportunity, and 1 deal. Discovery phase at Camu, like trying to figure out who wanted to buy. 100 conversations literally that we made. 3 turned out like a real opportunity. Like we closed like 2 deals, 2% full funnel conversion. After we move forward with that, and then with some of the learnings, we're like, okay, let's try to refine a little bit, like who could be the ideal profile. We made a V1 of our ICP, right? Like, okay, let's narrow it down. These types of companies, these types of like revenue ranges and so on. 30 conversations of that on that group, 12 open opportunities, 5 closed deals, right? At that point, right? 17% full funnel conversion, right? Like, man, drastic improvement. And then from this group, we realized, you know what? Out of this group, why don't we just go after the SAP Business One folks? And then we look at this very small audience, 17 conversations, 12 turned out into an opportunity, and 6 closed deals, right? 35% full funnel conversion, right? It's like 17x better, right? The difference of finding this or not finding this is literally like needing 500 or 30 first calls to close your first 10 customers, right? Like it can be extremely inefficient, and Pipefy was a little bit of that because we didn't know exactly where we could articulate value super strongly. And as we're looking for this at Camu from the start, like we created a hypothesis, we look at the data, like say, hey, we found something, right? And this is a kind of a unique open door we can get in. So like the summary of this thing like is like it's a mix of like building a hypothesis where we can articulate like qualitative understanding where and why we can win, executing on top of that, and like of course cross-checking that with some data, right? Like it's literally like funnel metrics, like am I converting at a decent pace that if I want to put effort here and resources here, can I scale at a minimally decent with like minimally decent economics on top of this? Because if I need 500 calls to close 10 customers, like think about the time and the resources that you need, right? So like obsessing about finding that pocket is very important in the beginning, right? So I also like to think about like isolating variables. get to the root cause of the real objections, and again, optimize for learning always, right? I like had this conversation the other day, like people are like, people are not buying, we don't know exactly why, right? I don't know if it's too expensive. I don't know if it's because of budget. I don't know if they just don't see value. So in the beginning, I also like to think like, if you can, don't optimize for pricing, right? Like trying to optimize and nail the right pricing from the beginning, probably not the smartest way. Like the way I like to think is like, how can I take some of those variables out of the equation? Like we had a situation with a prospect the other day, said, like budget is probably an issue, and like you know what, like say, you want to pay us next year, you can start paying next year, and like from a pricing perspective, this is the ROI, like it's a 10x ROI on top of this, like so I rather start with a low price so I don't have the doubt like, is it price the problem? I want to close customers, I want them to see a lot of value. If they're seeing a lot of value, they love the product, then we have the opportunity to optimize pricing as we move on. So again, like trying to optimize for learning, it's I think the most important thing and something that I'll definitely talk about. The other important aspect from this is like, man, if you're on B2B, I think it's mostly like the reality for most of this group, man, you gotta learn to map and communicate business impact from the very early days. Like I love this concept of no delta, no deal. If you can't articulate the delta between their current scenario and their future scenario and why it matters and why they should be spending money with you, you're gonna have a lot of trouble, right? Or it's gonna be a lot more challenging for you to sell, right? So, to sell. So like, and I'm going to show a quick framework on that, but like, what is the negative business impact of their current situation? Why it is a problem, right? And I always like to go a few steps deeper here, which is like, people want to buy Pipefy because we need a more customizable solution. That's not there's no business impact there. Why there is a problem about a solution that is not flexible enough? And then they might go into like, man, because everything I need to customize, I need to ask for a consultant. And then it takes time, and then it delays my processes, and I spend money every time. Okay, now maybe you're getting to some of that stuff. What I mean by this is like, when they describe their pain, it's really understanding like why this is a problem. What is the actual impact of that? And when you talk about the future scenario, okay, if we solve those problems, what is the true business outcome of that? And being able to articulate that future scenario is super important, right? Like it's also very common that in the beginning we talk about our features and all of stuff. The product's cool, but the reality is also that no one gives a shit. If it's flexible, it's better UX, it generates insights for you, it's customizable, it's easy to use. In the end, none of that is actually what drives business. People want to buy because they want to sell more, because they want to save money, they want to reduce cost, something like that. And if you're able to articulate that in a very tangible way, you're going to drastically increase your chances of selling. And man, this is like a founder's responsibility, right? In the beginning, like getting like junior AEs to try to figure that out and sell brute force, like super inefficient, you're not going to get to what really matters, right? I also really like to think about impact and articulating impact, because like if you think about how people buy it, things completely changed. In the past, think about software, like the risk was all on the buyer, right? 3-year contract, pay up front, all of that shit to implement, months of implementation. We're moving to completely the opposite, right? Which is like you implement super fast, people pay per month, like they pay per impact they're generating. There's AI companies that are going like you pay per outcome and stuff like that. So why does that matter? If you're not able to deliver, articulate, and present business impact and how they're actually generating impact from partnering with you, it's going to be hard, right, for you to maintain and close those customers, right? This is a very specific example of how we are trying to get this. Like this is what we presented to a customer the other day, but it's literally getting to like, hey, this is the financial impact. It's in Portuguese, but you get the sense of it. This is the financial impact that we're estimating. Those are the drivers. These are the premises. This is how much you're gonna get from this. And like this is the estimated ROI. And even if our premises are wrong by 10x, the project still pays for itself, right? So I think like why this matters, right? I think when we talk about explaining business impact, we're literally trying to get to like in a very tangible way, hey, this is how we're making money. This is why this investment makes sense. This is how I make your life better, right? Very simple hack for this. I literally built like a custom GPT that is a ROI wizard that I literally throw in there the transcript of the call. Of course, I gave it some instructions and so on. And as an output, it's helping me generate like ROI estimations, right? For me to like move faster. And when you're a one-man army trying to sell on your own, everything you can do to try to optimize and move fast and so on helps. So this has been super helpful. Literally, I throw a transcript there. It gives me a V1 of ROI. I validate, made some changes, present to customers. So really trying to get away from the like, it's cool, it's better, or like, hey, this is how you make money. This is how we make your life better, right? And this is kind of the framework I like to talk about it. And there's lots of different methodologies that are similar, but every time I'm navigating a customer conversation, I'm trying to understand what is the scenario they're in, why it matters from a business perspective, why there's a problem, what are the consequences, like where do you want to be? If they describe their ideal scenario, like why does it matter? If they get to the ideal scenario, why does it matter from a business perspective, right? How do they make more money or whatever? This is the delta, right? Like I need to be able to articulate there is a reasonable delta between the two. And I want to understand what they need from a product perspective, how they're going to measure success. And only after I learned all of this, then I'm going to talk about how we do it better, and like here are the proof points, right? So I really like to focus all of those conversations on really nailing this. Like, and when we are reviewing deals and opportunities, it's literally like, hey, is there a relevant delta here? Like, can I articulate why they should buy, right? So I think this is part of like really understanding why people would be crazy not to buy with you. And then I think this is the type of scenario we're always trying to get to. Like when I put this data together for this customer, I look at this and I think like, man, they would be crazy not to move forward. Like it's a 10x ROI, right? Like if I'm overestimating this, like it still pays for itself. Like why wouldn't you move forward? So that's the type of stuff we're trying to get to, right? This is a little bit of an example what we built at Pipefy. I'm not gonna go into the details, but it's really nailing this framework. Okay, for like before scenarios, what are usually the before scenarios the customers I'm selling to they're in? What are usually the negative consequences? What are the discovery questions I'm asking to try to get to this? Same thing for like how we do it better, and so on. So it's like when I find this audience that I want to delight, that I want to focus, I really try to go really deep into articulating value, why I generate value, how I generate value, why this is better, against who it's better, and all of that stuff. So that's chapter 2, right? Leverage, right? Like crazy obsessing about explaining why people would be crazy not to buy from you, and explaining business impact. And last one, and I'm going to be a lot quicker in this one, like demand, right? Build a foundation of demand gen system that can drive conversations with your target audience. Reality is, honestly, if you haven't nailed the previous two, you probably shouldn't be spending a lot of time here, right? This is how I think about this, because spending a lot of time to try to generate a lot of demand, if you really haven't nailed like who is the ideal persona, you're gonna end up in that scenario that I mentioned, like 100 conversations to close two, and spending money. And like it's much better for you to spend a little bit more time and really nail that, because then once you do it, that's when you find what, like the concept we like to talk about, like fast moving water, right? Like, okay, now I can really, for every person I talk to, like I have a decent chance of converting those guys. I can explain why it matters for them, and so on, right? So ideally, you want to think about scaling demand gen once you can articulate why and who would be crazy not to buy your product and service, and how do you clearly articulate business impacts for those folks. Like obsessing for that in the beginning, I think it's super important. Once you have that, I think like driving demand in the early stage, it's literally like a scientific project. Build a few hypotheses, several small bets, measure what is working, double down, right? Example, like started doing a bunch of cold outreach, LinkedIn, and so on. Very inefficient, right? It was very inefficient for us at Camu in the beginning. I started to test out and iterate other stuff. Like at some point we found out like, man, actually companies that implement SAP, man, much easier path for those customers. Like those guys, they're sitting on top of 100 customers, right? Like, man, like instead of like the level of energy that I can drive to those guys, we started generating a lot more opportunity, moving a lot faster. We tried sponsoring events. We tried doing our own events, like try a bunch of small stuff. Like we're now partnering with some influencers that talk to this audience, like small bets, understand what is working, move on from there, right? I don't get married with one strategy from the beginning. Like reality is like everything that we tried, the stuff that I put most energy was like trying to do cold outbound, and in the end it was the most inefficient, right? So just allocate time where it matters most, where it's generating more, and so on. And I think the last concept I want to bring is like you gotta lead with value, right? Like in today's world, like man, everyone's inboxes are completely filled with shallow outreach and a bunch of crap. Like people can't articulate value; they're just like asking for your time and trying to get some time on your agenda. Like man, you gotta nail messaging. You gotta tell why it matters for them. Like make it hard for them to say no. Like very simple example again, we sponsored an event for tax professionals that gave us like 15 or 20 invitations for the event, like pretty cool event, kind of expensive. So like we just leveraged that to invite people that had never replied to us, outreach, hey, actually have an extra ticket for this event. You wanna join? Like I'm actually inviting people that are operating on companies that are SAP Business One. Like everyone replied, like, and then the reply, oh, of course, I would like to go to the event. And sorry for not replying to you the first time you wrote, I was too busy and so on. So in the end, man, you gotta find like how do you deliver value up front, and then of course you gave them the ticket, they went there, they are then happy to schedule some time with you after that. This is one example, but I think you get the framework, right? I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but like if you think about marketing, how it's evolving, like the shift of where money is being spent, right? Like a lot of growth on digital channels, like thought leadership and all of that stuff, paid media decreasing, right? Like and using technology more and more. So this is kind of the trend, and you naturally see people adapting. And I'll leave this on the deck. I'm not going to go through that, but as you think about where to place your bets, like there's a bunch of stuff here, like from online presence, user groups, events, in person, online, direct marketing, like referrals, influencers. There's so much stuff that you can try and experiment. And I'll leave this more as like you guys can look at this, think about it, and decide where it might make sense to place some of the bets for you guys. Last one. This is kind of a very cool article that we had a chance to see like in the early days at Camu. So basically, what this guy is talking about, if you're hiring a growth and go-to-market person as an early stage founder, give them this checklist, ask them to execute on this within 6 months. I'm not going to go through this, but good framework to think about like what you should be thinking about, where you should spending energy and so on. There's actually a lot of stuff. I'm going to get close to the 6 month mark in Camu. Haven't been able to check all of those boxes, but it's a good thing for you to look at this and think like where I should prioritize, what makes sense, and all of that. Some other additional resources that it's good stuff that I like about like founder-led sales. I'll leave it there. Like if I were to summarize takeaways, four main things. Focus is a superpower on the early days. Obsess about like understanding who and why they would be crazy not to use our product. Obsess about being able to articulate business impact in the most tangible way. And demand gen as a scientific approach. Small bets, track, measure, evolve from there. Don't waste your scarce resources in the early days if you haven't nailed the first ones, or it's just like waste money, time, and resources. Lastly, I really like this one. It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure, but just ain't so. So I think like keeping a super humble and open mind in the early days is super important. Testing things out, open to learn. When you're too sure about something, that's when you close yourself to like learning, doing benchmark, iterating, testing, listening to customers and so on. So keeping that humble and like open-minded mindset, I think it's super important.